I was standing at my kitchen window at 11:30 at night, glass of water in my hand, about to go to bed, when I saw the lights. Not house lights, not porch lights, moving lights, phone flashlights, the kind that swing and bounce, coming from behind my back fence. And then I heard the music, low bass, muffled laughter, the unmistakable sound of bodies hitting water. My pool. My private, locked, fenced, clearly posted as private pool. I stood there for a moment just to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding something. I was not misunderstanding something. There were people in my backyard, in my pool, at 11:30 at night, without my knowledge, without my permission. I grabbed my phone and walked toward the back door, and as I stepped out onto the patio, I saw them, 6, maybe 7 people, late teens or early 20s, spread across the water with drinks in hand and music playing from a Bluetooth speaker balanced on the edge of the pool deck. They saw me at the same moment I saw them. There was a beat of silence. And then, from the far corner of the pool, something long and dark broke the surface of the water and shot straight up into the air, not 1 inch, not 2, a full 2 feet of thick-bodied snake rising out of my pool like a cable pulled from below. Everybody screamed, including me, including the snake probably. And that was the beginning of the strangest, funniest, most legally consequential week of my entire HOA experience. My name is Ray Kowalski, and I own a home at 22 Bluestone Court in the Clearwater Pines community, a mid-size HOA development of about 160 homes built in the late 90s in the southeast, where the summers are long and brutal, and a backyard pool is not a luxury so much as a survival mechanism. I bought the house 9 years ago, right after my divorce, at that particular stage of life where you make decisions based partly on logic and partly on a deep need to have one thing, just one thing, that is entirely yours. The pool was the deciding factor. A private pool, fully fenced, screened enclosure, saltwater system. Maintenance cost aside, it has been the single best purchase of my life. My neighbors in Clearwater Pines are mostly fine people. There are the Hendersons on my left, retired school teachers who grow tomatoes and wave at everything that moves. There are the Rameyses on my right, a young family with 3 kids under 8 who I genuinely like even when the kids' basketball bounces into my yard at 7 in the morning. Further down the street, there are the Donahues, the Patels, the Woos, ordinary people living ordinary lives in ordinary houses with ordinary amounts of drama. And then there is Craig Bellamy. Craig Bellamy lives directly behind me. His backyard backs up to my backyard, separated by my 6-foot privacy fence. He is 34 years old, works in some kind of sales job that requires him to take a lot of loud phone calls on his patio, and has the particular energy of a man who peaked in his junior year of high school and has spent the subsequent decade and a half trying to recreate that feeling. Craig throws parties, not occasionally, frequently, not small gatherings, events. His backyard is equipped with string lights, outdoor speakers, a gas fire pit, a refrigerator, and what I can only describe as a hospitality-grade cooler that fits enough beer for a small wedding. He has a regular rotation of friends, many of whom I recognize by their cars and their voices and their tendency to stay until 2 in the morning. Craig does not have a pool. I noticed starting about 2 summers ago that Craig would sometimes glance over my fence when I was in the pool. Not in a threatening way, just that particular look of longing that people get when they want something they don't have and they're trying to figure out if they can get it without asking. I know that look. I've had that look about things in my own life. I never invited Craig to use my pool. We are not friends. We are barely acquaintances. We have had maybe 6 real conversations in 9 years, 3 of which were about the property line, and 1 of which was about his music being too loud on a Sunday morning. He never asked to use the pool. He never knocked on my door. He never sent me a text. What he did, apparently, was tell his friends that he knew where there was a pool. The night of the incident, a Friday in late July, I had been at my sister's house for dinner and gotten home around 10. I checked the pool, as I usually do when I've been away. The saltwater system occasionally needs adjustment, and I like to make sure everything is running and everything looked fine. Lights off, cover on the pump, gate latched. I went inside, watched some television, went to the kitchen for water at 11:30. And there they were. Now, before I go any further, I need to tell you about the snake. We live in the southeast, and in the southeast, wildlife does not wait for an invitation. I have had armadillos in my yard. I have had possums on my porch. I have had a family of raccoons take up residence in my garbage enclosure for 3 weeks one spring, and evicting them was one of the more humbling experiences of my adult life. I also apparently have snakes near my pool. I had known this in a theoretical way. The HOA community backs up to a small natural area, a strip of preserved wetland, and where there is wetland there are snakes. But I had never seen one in the pool itself. I had seen them on the deck once or twice. I had seen them in the grass near the fence, but never in the water. The snake that appeared that night, rising out of the far corner of the pool at the worst possible moment for approximately 7 uninvited guests, was, I later determined after looking up my options online, a southern banded water snake, non-venomous, common in the region. A perfectly ordinary snake who had probably been living near my pool all summer and who had decided, in his entirely reasonable snake way, that this particular Friday night was a good time to surface. He was not dangerous. He was, however, approximately 3.5 feet long and quite thick, and he emerged from the water in a way that I can only describe as dramatic, purposeful, almost theatrical. The response was immediate and total. 2 of the uninvited guests went straight over the pool fence, not through the gate, over the fence, and disappeared into Craig's backyard. 1 person sat on the pool deck, phone still in hand, frozen. 2 others scrambled to the steps and exited the pool in a way that was more falling than climbing. 1 person, to their considerable credit, actually tried to help. They grabbed the Bluetooth speaker off the edge of the pool before they ran, which I respected even in the chaos. Craig Bellamy was in the pool. He was the last one out. He emerged from the shallow end with the particular dignity of a man who has been caught doing something he knows he shouldn't be doing, and he stood on my pool deck dripping and looking at me, and I looked at him, and the snake slid quietly over the edge and disappeared into the grass. There was a very long silence. Craig said, "Hey, Ray." I said, "Craig." He said, "We were just." I said, "I know what you were doing." He said, "The thing is." I said, "Go home, Craig." He went home. His friends, those who were still on my property, followed him back over or around the fence. I stood on my pool deck in my pajamas in the July heat, alone, the pool lights off, the surface of the water still rocking gently from the evacuation. The Bluetooth speaker, I noticed, was still sitting on my deck. Somebody had left it, probably the person who saved it from the water and then panicked and ran anyway. I went inside. I poured myself a glass of something stronger than water. I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about what had just happened, and I made a decision. I was going to handle this correctly. The first thing I did, the very first thing, before I went to bed that night, was document everything. I went back outside with my phone and I took photographs of the pool deck. There were wet footprints everywhere. There were 2 empty beer cans that someone had left on the pool steps. The gate latch, I could now see, had been manipulated, not broken, but forced open with something narrow, like a screwdriver or a flathead, and the latch was slightly bent. Someone had deliberately opened my locked gate to access my pool. I photographed all of it, the footprints, the beer cans, the damaged latch, the gap in the fence where 2 people had climbed over, which had pulled one of the fence pickets slightly loose. Then I went inside and I wrote down a description of everything I had seen, who was there, what time it was, what condition the property was in, while it was still fresh in my mind. Then I went to bed. Because it was after midnight, and I am a 47-year-old man with a job, and if I don't sleep I am useless. In the morning I made coffee, called my friend Janet, who is a paralegal and knows about these things, and told her the whole story, including the snake. She laughed for approximately 90 seconds. Then she said, "Okay, here's what you do." Janet is very good at telling you what to do. It's one of her best qualities. She told me to file a police report, not because I expected criminal prosecution, Trespassing cases like this rarely result in that, but because a police report creates a documented record that the incident occurred. She told me to contact my homeowner's insurance to report property damage, the forced latch, the loose fence picket. She told me to send Craig Bellamy a written letter, dated and sent certified mail, documenting what had happened and formally notifying him that he and his guests had trespassed on my property and caused damage. And she told me to check my HOA's rules about pools. I pulled out my copy of the Clearwater Pines CC and RS. I read the relevant sections, and I found something that would turn this from a neighbor dispute into a full HOA situation. Section 12, subsection B of the Clearwater Pines CC and RS states, all pool facilities within the community, whether common or private, must be maintained with adequate safety and security measures as determined by the community safety standards. Private pool enclosures must include a self-latching, self-closing gate mechanism that meets or exceeds current pool safety code requirements. Pool owners are responsible for ensuring that their pool security measures prevent unauthorized access. Now I had a self-latching gate. It had been forced open. But there is a version of this rule that could be read to suggest that if someone got into your pool, your security was inadequate, and you, the pool owner, could be cited. I thought about this for a while. Then I found Section 12, subsection D. Subsection D stated, residents who cause or facilitate unauthorized access to any pool facility, whether common area or private, are subject to fines of up to $500 per incident and may be required to pay for any resulting damages. Residents who cause or facilitate unauthorized access. Craig Bellamy had not jumped my fence himself. Well, technically he had, but more importantly, he had told his friends about my pool, arranged for them to come over and let them access my property through a gate he or someone in his group had forced open. He had facilitated unauthorized access to my private pool. I called Janet back and told her what I'd found. She said, "Oh, that's very useful." I said, "I know." She said, "You're going to file a complaint with the HOA." I said, "I'm going to file a complaint with the HOA." The Clearwater Pines HOA board consists of 4 members. The president is a woman named Beverly Aldrich, who works in real estate and takes the HOA's governing documents extremely seriously. The vice president is a man named Tom Whitfield, who is mostly agreeable. The other 2 members are rotating residents who have minimal power and mostly vote with Beverly. I have a decent relationship with Beverly, not friendly exactly, but respectful. She runs a tight ship and she is consistent, which I appreciate. She enforces the rules on everyone equally, including, notably, herself. Her own property is immaculate and in full compliance at all times. I went to Beverly's door on Saturday morning with my documentation. I knocked. She opened the door, saw my expression, and said, "Ray, come in." I showed her the photographs. I showed her the written account. I showed her the police report number, which I had obtained that morning. I walked her through Section 12, subsections B and D, and I explained my interpretation of how Craig Bellamy had facilitated unauthorized access to my private pool. Beverly listened to all of this without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Does Craig know you're bringing this to me?" I said, "Not yet." She said, "I'll need to hear his account before making any determination." I said, "Of course. I just wanted to get you the documentation while it was fresh." She said, "I appreciate that. I'll contact Craig and schedule a meeting." I said, "One more thing." She looked at me. I said, "There's a pool safety issue I want to address at the same time. My latch was forced. I'm going to replace it with a better security setup, a keyed lock mechanism. I want to make sure that's in compliance with HOA standards before I install it." Beverly nodded. She said, "Bring me the product specs and I'll review them. That sounds like exactly the right response." I went home feeling pretty good about the morning. Craig Bellamy did not have a good weekend. I know this because I could hear him through the fence. Not the words, just the tone, the elevated voice, several phone calls that sounded like the kind of conversations you have when you are explaining to people why they should be concerned. I imagined the chain of communication. Beverly calling Craig, Craig calling his friends who had been at the pool, his friends asking questions he didn't have good answers to. On Sunday afternoon, Craig knocked on my front door. I opened it. He looked tired. He was wearing a grey t-shirt and carrying a six-pack of beer, which I interpreted as a peace offering and also as a small insight into how Craig Bellamy solves most problems. He said, "Can we talk?" I said, "Sure, want to come in?" He came in. I did not take the beer. I put on coffee. We sat at my kitchen table and he looked at the table for a while and then he said, "I didn't break your gate. I want you to know that. I didn't do it." I said, "Do you know who did?" He was quiet. I said, "Craig, you told people you knew where there was a pool they could use on a Friday night. Your friends came to my property, forced my gate, used my pool without my permission, and left beer cans on my pool steps. Someone in that group damaged my latch and my fence. I have photographs. I have a police report. And I have a section of the HOA rules that specifically covers residents who facilitate unauthorized pool access." He said, "I didn't think it would be a big deal." I said, "My gate was forced open. That's not a small deal, Craig." He said, "I know, I'm sorry." It was a real apology. I could tell. The particular quality of an apology from someone who has been caught and has thought about it overnight and arrived somewhere genuine. I said, "Here's what I need from you. I need the name of whoever forced the gate. Not for the police. I don't want to press criminal charges against some 22-year-old for trespassing. I need it for the HOA complaint because I need to demonstrate that the damage was caused by a specific person, not by a mechanical failure on my part." He gave me a name. His friend Devon, who had apparently produced a flathead screwdriver from his pocket and said he could get the gate open, and had done so, and had been very proud of this until approximately 11:45 when the snake appeared. I wrote down Devon's name and contact information. Then I said, "Craig, I want to be straight with you. I'm not trying to destroy your life over this. I'm not going to try to have Devon arrested. But I need the HOA complaint to proceed because I need the official record to reflect that this was your facilitation. Otherwise, the HOA might try to hold me responsible for inadequate pool security, and I am not going to accept that." Craig nodded slowly. I said, "If you cooperate with the process, if you acknowledge to Beverly what you told your friends, and you confirm that you arranged for people to come to my property, I will ask Beverly to consider that cooperation in determining the outcome." He said, "What does that mean for me?" I said, "I don't know exactly. It's Beverly's call, probably a fine, maybe a formal warning, nothing that ends your time in the neighborhood." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." He said, "For what it's worth, the snake was genuinely terrifying." I said, "It really was." We almost laughed, almost. He left. I took a long look at my pool through the back window, calm, clean, the salt system running quietly, the afternoon sun on the water, and I thought about how something as simple as a pool, as simple as privacy, as simple as a lock on a gate, can become the center of a whole complicated human situation if you let it. If you let other people decide that your things are available to them because they want them to be. I had not let it. I had shown up, documented, and dealt with it correctly. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. And that is where this story gets genuinely interesting. Because Beverly Aldrich, it turned out, had done some investigating of her own. And what she found was not just about Craig and the pool. It was about something that had been going on in Clearwater Pines for 2 summers, something involving 3 other private pools, and a pattern of access that nobody had thought to connect until Beverly started pulling on the thread. I'm going to tell you everything in part 2. The meeting, Beverly's investigation. what they found on the security cameras that one of my neighbors had installed without ever telling anyone, the HOA's decision, and the absolutely unbelievable thing that Craig Bellamy did at the end of the meeting that changed everyone's understanding of the whole situation. If you missed part 1, quick version, I'm Ray Kowalski. I own a home with a private pool in a southeast HOA community. My neighbor Craig Bellamy told his friends they could use my pool without asking me. They snuck in on a Friday night, forced my gate latch, and were in the middle of an unauthorized pool party when a 3.5-foot water snake surfaced dramatically in the deep end and sent everybody running. I filed a police report, documented the damage, and brought an HOA complaint against Craig under the rule covering residents who facilitate unauthorized pool access. Craig cooperated. A meeting was scheduled. What I didn't know was that Beverly Aldrich had spent the week before that meeting finding out things I never expected. Beverly Aldrich has lived in Clearwater Pines for 14 years. She has been HOA board president for 6 of those years. In that time, she has handled fence disputes, noise complaints, unauthorized paint colors, an incident involving a resident who tried to install a rooftop solar array without approval, and one memorable situation involving a resident's peacock, a full peacock, kept in a suburban backyard, which resulted in a 3-month negotiation that Beverly describes as the most complex governance challenge of her tenure. She is not a person who does things halfway. When I brought her my complaint about Craig and the pool, Beverly did what Beverly always does. She read the relevant rules, considered the situation from multiple angles, and began investigating systematically. She spoke to Craig, who confirmed his role in arranging the Friday night gathering and gave Beverly the same account he gave me. He had told friends about the pool, had not personally forced the gate, had not anticipated that anyone would force the gate. He was cooperative and apologetic, which Beverly noted in her records. She spoke to Devon, the gate forcer, who was, by this point, deeply embarrassed and extremely eager to make the situation go away. He confirmed that he had used a flathead screwdriver to manipulate the gate latch and that he had not been invited to the property by the homeowner. He offered to pay for the latch replacement. Beverly noted this as well. And then Beverly started asking a different question. Not just, what happened at Ray's pool, but, has anything like this happened before in this community? She went back through HOA complaint records. She talked to residents. She talked to the maintenance company that services the community's common areas. And she found a thread. Over the previous 2 summers, there had been 3 noise complaints filed against unknown parties in the vicinity of private pool enclosures in Clearwater Pines, 2 of them on summer weekends late at night, 1 on a holiday Monday. None of the 3 complaints had been investigated seriously. They had been filed, noted, and closed without follow-up, attributed to general neighborhood noise or parties whose source was unclear. Beverly went back and looked at those 3 complaints more carefully. 2 of them were in the vicinity of properties owned by residents who were, Beverly confirmed, away from home when the noise occurred, traveling, out of town. Their houses were dark and their cars were gone. Someone had been using empty houses' pools. Beverly brought this to Tom Whitfield, the vice president, who said, HM. Tom says HM a lot. It is his entire range of emotional expression, but in this case, the HM conveyed genuine concern. Beverly then did something I did not know she had done until she revealed it at the Thursday meeting. She contacted each of the 3 homeowners who had been away during those noise complaint incidents and asked if they had any outdoor security cameras. 2 of them did not. 1 of them did. Sandra Okafor, who lives on the opposite side of Clearwater Pines from me, had installed a Ring camera system, 4 cameras total, including one that covered her backyard and pool area, after a package theft incident the previous winter. She had never reviewed the footage from the summer incidents because nobody had asked her to, and she hadn't noticed anything wrong when she got home from her trips. Beverly asked Sandra to pull the archived footage from the relevant dates. Sandra pulled it. And on the footage from the July 4th weekend, Sandra had been visiting her daughter in Atlanta. There was something remarkable. 7 people in Sandra Okafor's private pool. Drinking, swimming, music playing from a speaker on the pool deck, from approximately 9 p.m. to nearly 1 in the morning. Beverly watched the footage on Sandra's laptop. She recognized some of the faces. One of them was Craig Bellamy. 2 others were people she recognized as Craig's regular circle, the same friends who had been at my pool on the Friday night in July. Beverly called me on Wednesday evening, the night before the meeting, and told me this in a very controlled, careful voice. She said, "I want you to know what we found before the meeting tomorrow. I think it changes the scope of what we're dealing with." I sat down. I said, "Beverly, are you telling me Craig has been using other people's pools all summer?" She said, "I'm telling you that the footage shows people at Sandra Okafor's pool on a night when Sandra was out of town, and that Craig Bellamy appears to be among them. I'm going to present this at tomorrow's meeting and give Craig the opportunity to respond." I said, "How is Sandra?" Beverly said, "Angry, she's coming to the meeting." The Clearwater Pines HOA community room is attached to the common area clubhouse, which also houses the community pool. The common pool, the one everyone is allowed to use. It's a medium-sized room with folding chairs and a projection screen and a folding table at the front where the board members sit. Thursday evening, when I arrived, it was more crowded than any HOA meeting I'd attended. Word had gotten around, not the full story, but enough of it that people were curious. There were maybe 30 residents there, which is roughly 3 times the normal attendance. Craig was there. He was sitting near the back, alone, wearing the gray t-shirt again. He looked like a man who knew that something was coming and was trying to decide whether to stay or run. Sandra Okafor was there. She is a woman in her early 60s, elegant and composed, the kind of person who carries herself like she is used to being taken seriously. She was sitting in the second row with her laptop and a very particular expression on her face. Beverly called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. She went through routine business quickly. There were a few agenda items about landscaping maintenance and the upcoming community event schedule, and then she said, "We have a significant resident matter to discuss this evening. I want to approach it with fairness and give all relevant parties the opportunity to speak." She presented my complaint first. She summarized the Friday night incident clearly and without editorializing: the unauthorized access, the damaged gate latch, the beer cans left on the steps, Craig's acknowledgement of his role in arranging the gathering, Devon's acknowledgement of forcing the gate. She showed my photographs on the projection screen. She noted that I had filed a police report and documented everything systematically. She said, under Section 12, Subsection D of our CC and RS, residents who facilitate unauthorized access to any pool facility are subject to fines up to $500 per incident. Based on the evidence and Craig's own acknowledgement, the board is prepared to issue a fine of $500 and a formal written warning. She looked at Craig. She said, "Craig, do you have anything to add or contest?" Craig said, "No," he said it quietly. "I'm sorry to Ray and to the board. It was a bad decision." Beverly nodded. Then she said, "There is an additional matter." She clicked to the security camera footage on the projection screen. The room was silent as everyone watched 7 people appear in Sandra Okafor's pool on July 4th weekend. You could hear the tinny audio from the laptop speakers, music, laughter, the sound of water. Beverly froze the footage at a point where Craig's face was clearly visible. She said, "Craig, this footage was recorded at the home of Sandra Okafor on the 4th of July weekend. Sandra was out of town. Were you present at her property on that evening?" The room was very quiet. Craig looked at the frozen image of his own face on the projection screen. He looked at Sandra Okafor. He looked at his hands. Then he said, "Yes." A murmur went through the room, not a dramatic wave of gasps, more of a collective exhale. the sound of 30 people processing something simultaneously. Beverly said, "Were you invited to her property by Sandra or anyone authorized to invite you?" Craig said, "No." Beverly said, "How did you access her pool enclosure?" Craig said, "The gate wasn't locked, it was just closed. We just opened it and went in." Sandra Okafor turned in her chair and looked at Craig with an expression I will not attempt to describe in full, except to say that it contained approximately 16 distinct emotions, and every single one of them was justified. Beverly said, "Craig, is there anything else the board should know about? Any other incidents at any other properties in this community?" And here is the thing, the absolutely unbelievable thing I told you was coming. Craig said, "There's one more." The room was so quiet you could have heard a feather land. Craig said, "The Martins, on Clearwater Loop. They were in Costa Rica in June. We used their pool once, just once. Their gate was unlocked." Beverly wrote something on her notepad. She said, "Are the Martins in the room this evening?" They were not, but based on the reactions of people around me, at least 3 of their neighbors had heard what Craig just said, and those 3 people had phones, and I estimated that the Martins would know within approximately 20 minutes. Beverly said, "Craig, I want to acknowledge that you've been honest with the board this evening. That matters. It doesn't undo the violations, but it matters." Craig nodded. Beverly said, "Here is the board's determination." Beverly spoke for about 10 minutes. She was methodical and fair, which is entirely in character. Here is what she said. "For the incident at my property, $500 fine, formal written warning, requirement to reimburse me for the cost of gate latch replacement and fence picket repair, which came to $218. Devon, as the person who directly caused the property damage, was assessed a separate fine of $250, which Beverly sent him by certified letter the following week. For the incident at Sandra Okafor's property, a second $500 fine. Beverly noted that the gate had not been locked, which did not excuse the trespass, but meant that no property damage had been caused in the same way. She also noted, with what I can only describe as impressive understatement, that the pattern of behavior suggested this was not an isolated lapse in judgment. For the incident at the Martins' property, the board would need to contact the Martins and determine whether any damage or concerns existed. A third fine was possible pending that conversation. Total potential fines against Craig Bellamy, $1,500 plus the reimbursement to me. Beverly also issued a community-wide notice. She drafted it that evening and sent it by email to all homeowners by 9 p.m., reminding residents that private pool areas are private property, that unauthorized access is a violation of both community rules and the law, and that the board would investigate and prosecute any future incidents. Then she did one more thing. She said, "I want to address the pool security guidelines in our CC and RS." She said the current language, while adequate, was not specific enough about the security standard required. She said she was proposing an amendment to Section 12 that would specify a minimum security requirement, a keyed or coded lock on all private pool gates, not just a self-latching mechanism, and that this amendment would be put to a resident vote at the next quarterly meeting. She said, "What happened at multiple properties in this community over the past 2 summers is partly a governance failure. We did not investigate the noise complaints adequately. We did not connect the incidents. The board takes responsibility for that, and we are committed to doing better." I want to tell you, in 9 years of HOA membership, I have never heard a board president say, "We take responsibility for that," about anything. It was so unusual that it took me a moment to process it. The meeting ended at 8:40 p.m. After the meeting, Sandra Okafor came and found me in the parking lot after. She said, "Thank you for filing the complaint. If you hadn't, none of this would have come out." I said, "I'm sorry about your pool. I'm sorry it happened to you." She said, "It's funny. I used that pool for 10 years and never thought twice about privacy. I just assumed it's my yard, it's private, people know better. She paused. People don't always know better. I said, no, they don't. She said, I'm putting a keyed lock on Monday. I said, me too. We stood there for a moment in the parking lot, the summer air heavy and warm, the sound of frogs starting up in the preserve behind the development. Two people who had never had a real conversation before, standing together in the dark having one. She said, what about the snake? I said, southern banded water snake, non-venomous, lives near the water. I've decided he was doing me a favor. She laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh. She said, the best security system you never planned for. She was right about that. Craig. I saw Craig the following weekend. He was in his backyard, cleaning the fire pit, going about his ordinary Saturday morning. He saw me over the fence. There was a pause. He said, I paid the fines. I said, I know, Beverly told me, and the reimbursement I got it, thank you. He said, I know I could have just asked you. Years ago, I should have just asked. I said, probably would have gone differently. He said, would you have said yes? I thought about it, honestly. I said, probably not every time, but maybe sometimes, on my terms. He nodded. I said, Craig, you had a really good setup in your backyard. Fire pit, speakers, the whole thing, use it. He said, it's not a pool. I said, no, it's not. He said, the snake really got me, man. I still dream about it. I laughed, I couldn't help it. He laughed too. It wasn't reconciliation exactly. It wasn't forgiveness in any deep sense. It was just two men who live behind each other's fences, having an honest moment in their backyards and deciding that hostility isn't worth the maintenance. The Martins. Beverly contacted the Martins, Bill and Carol Martin, who had indeed been in Costa Rica in June. Carol Martin called me a week later. She was, I would say, approximately the same temperature as Sandra Okafor had been, which is to say, volcanic on the inside, composed on the outside. She said their gate had also been unlocked that summer. No damage, but she found a forgotten water toy in the pool, a foam noodle that didn't belong to them, which she said she could not explain before Beverly's email arrived, and which now made terrible sense. She said, who just does that? Who just walks into someone else's pool? I said, someone who doesn't think of it as walking into someone else's space. Someone who's decided that if it's there and nobody's using it, it's available. She said, that's exactly the problem. I said, yeah, it is. The Martins did not pursue additional action against Craig beyond what the HOA had already imposed. They got a keyed lock. They emailed Beverly to say they would support the CC&R amendment at the quarterly meeting. The amendment passed at the quarterly meeting, 14-4, with abstentions. Clearwater Pines now requires keyed or coded locks on all private pool enclosures. The board sends an annual reminder email in May before pool season opens. Beverly did a compliance check last spring, walked the relevant sections of the community, visually confirmed that pool gate security met the new standard. She flagged 3 properties that hadn't updated, sent them notices, and followed up until they came into compliance. That is Beverly Aldrich being Beverly Aldrich. I appreciate her enormously. Where we are now. It has been 2 summers since all of this happened. My pool has a coded lock on the gate. The same code I use is in the HOA's records for emergency access, and a security camera mounted on the back eave of the house that covers the full deck area. I installed the camera not out of paranoia, but out of the understanding that documentation matters, that having a record changes what is possible when something goes wrong. The snake, or his relatives, continue to live near my property. I have seen him or one of his friends twice more since that July night, once on the pool deck and once in the grass near the fence. I have made a policy of leaving him alone. He is a southern banded water snake living in a warm suburban wetland, and he is not my enemy. He is, if anything, an unofficial part of my security team, at least during the summer months. Craig threw a birthday party in his backyard last August. I could hear it from my kitchen, music, laughter, the sounds of people having a good time. I did not begrudge it. He has his backyard and his fire pit and his very large cooler, and those are his things, and he is welcome to enjoy them. He did not come over my fence. He did not knock on my door either, but that's okay. We're not there yet. Maybe we get there, maybe we don't. What I want to tell you, the thing I keep coming back to when I think about all of this, is that the neighborhood changed a little bit after that summer. Not dramatically, not in ways you'd necessarily notice from the outside, but something shifted. People started showing up to HOA meetings more. Not because the meetings are fun, they're not, folding chairs and stale coffee and parliamentary procedure, but because the summer of the pool incident made visible something that had been invisible before, that the rules matter, and the rules only work if people know them and invoke them and show up to make sure they're applied. 3 more residents installed security cameras on their pool enclosures. The quarterly meeting that passed the lock amendment had better attendance than any meeting I can remember. Beverly got 2 emails from residents thanking her for the way she handled the situation, for being fair, for being transparent, for saying, "We take responsibility." Small things, but small things accumulate. The neighborhood is a little more awake now, a little more aware, a little more connected, people who never talked before, like me and Sandra Okafor, having real conversations in parking lots. All of that started with 7 people in my pool, a 3.5-foot snake with a flair for timing, and a decision to document everything and handle it correctly. Document everything, find the people who apply the rules fairly, build the record, show up.